Welcome to another App Dev League video. I'm Ashwin, and as an overview of what we're going to do today, we're first going to look at advanced HTML tags following our Intro to HTML video. We're going to look at how to style specific elements with CSS, and then finally how to structure a personal website. So first we're going to look at some advanced HTML tags. The three that we're going to go over today are headers, navs, and footers. So first of all, headers can act as like the title section of a page and usually provide some information about what the page actually is. Navs are the navigation section of the page and usually contain links to other parts of your website. Footers are the ending of your page and usually have a similar purpose to navs. So if we go to a REPL project, we can take a look at all three of these in action. If you want a tutorial on how to set up your own project on REPL, I suggest you take a look at our Intro to HTML video. As we saw in our previous videos, inside the HTML element, there are usually two main elements, the head and the body. Inside of the body, however, there are a lot of other elements that give you a lot of functionality with styling your website. All of these make use with the main concepts of HTML elements that we looked at last time. Starting with headers, we can make a header section in our body element. Just like every other element in HTML, we start with the angle bracket. In our header element, we can make use of every other HTML element that we looked at last time. So for example, if I wanted to add a heading element for the title of my website, I could just add that in normally. So now we can add the title to our website. I'm just going to put filler information for now, but we can just say my website. Now when we run this, we should see that on the top of our page just like normal. Next, we're going to look at the nav element. Under our header element, we're going to add a nav. So just like always, we put it with the angle brackets. And then inside we can add links. So now I'm going to add a couple of filler links with the anchor element. And then for now I'm just going to put link inside. And then I'm going to copy this a couple times just so we have a couple links in our nav. Obviously you would want to put a link inside of these, but I'm just giving an example for now. So now when we run this, we should see these three links show up on our web page. Later, we'll look at how to make this look a little better on our website. Finally, we'll take a look at footer elements. So we can start our footer element just like normal, and then again, we can just add content normally. So if I add another heading element down here, I can just say this is the bottom of the web page. And then when I rerun this, obviously we'll see that on our web page too. Right now, these new elements don't have any other functionality, but we're going to look at how to change that with CSS. So next, we're going to look at how we can style specific elements on our web page. To do this, we're going to use styling by IDs. And what that means is that we can specifically identify an element on our web page and only style that. As a reminder of how we used CSS before, we can try to style our heading element. So if we just put h1 here, and then, for example, if I just put the color as red, our two heading elements will show up as red. However, this method is pretty ineffective on an actual website as it requires you to have all of those elements as red. So now we're going to look at how we can specifically style elements. So as an example, if we only wanted to style the text in our header as red, we could do that in our CSS by only accessing the header element. To do that, we can just replace our h1 with header. And then when we rerun that, the text in our header only shows up as red. Similarly, we can look at our footer element, and if we wanted to change the color of the text in that, we could just say color and then set it to blue. And then it'll change that element specifically. This also means that as you add elements to your web page, they'll adopt the styles of the element that they're in. While doing this though, we run into a similar problem that we had before, where if we wanted to style elements differently in the same element, we would be unable to do that. So we're going to look at how to specifically identify a single piece of text. Back to our HTML file, if we wanted to specifically identify a piece of text on our web page, we could add an attribute to it to let us do that in CSS. So if we go to our heading element right here, we could just add the ID attribute, and then we could give the ID heading 1. And then when we go to our CSS file, instead of header here, we're going to identify that specific element. To actually identify that piece of text, we're going to put the ID we gave it instead of just the element name. And to do that, we're going to do the hashtag and then heading 1. So now if we rerun our web page, nothing should really look different. But when we go back to our index.html, you'll see what the ID actually does. So I'm going to copy this element right here. And instead of having the same ID, I'm going to give it the ID of heading 2. So now when we run this, it will not adopt the style that we gave it in our CSS file, which is why it shows up as black. If we wanted to style this element, we could also use its ID. So if we go here and we use heading 2, we could give it the color green. And then we've specifically styled that element. Just to review, to specifically identify an element on our page, we can add the ID attribute, which will allow us to call it by name in our CSS file. And then in our CSS file, we can style that element with the hashtag in front of it. Now we can try adding content to our web page. Back to our HTML page, we're going to start by making our website look a little better using what we just learned. So first of all, I'm just going to delete this second element I created. Next, in our style.css, we can start by editing the header. We can keep the coloring that we have here, but usually it looks better for headers to be centered, so we can do that here. Right now, we can just replace this with our header element, and then we can use a CSS property called text align. So when we type in text align, we can type in center, and then when we rerun this, the text in our header will appear centered. Next, we're going to edit the nav section of our web page and make it so that the links aren't all bunched up right here. To do that, we can style our nav section exactly how we did to our header. To actually space out our links, we're going to be using a couple different CSS properties. First is display, and that's going to allow us to actually just move around elements how we want. And then we're going to set that to the value of flex. Next, we're going to set flex direction. So what this is going to do is tell our web page which way we want to order our elements. So if I set it to row, our links will show up in a row. So to actually space out our elements, we're going to be using a property called justify content. And to do that, we can just type in justify content here. And then we're going to be using the value of space around. And what this is going to do is basically tell our web page to put the equal amount of space between all of our elements. Now you can see that our elements are all spaced out, and if I resize the web page, our nav automatically adjusts. Next, we're going to edit our footer element and look at how to add backgrounds. So to add a background to our footer element, we can just use the property background color. So we can just type in background dash color. And then if we wanted to set that to, for example, black, we would type that in, and then when we run it, you can see that the text on our footer adopts the background color of black. Just like our header, we can center the text with the text align property. So what the main element does is basically tells your browser where the main content on your web page is. I'm going to give an example of how you could showcase some of your other projects on your web page. First, we're going to add a title section. So we're going to add another heading and make it smaller than our title, so H2. And then I'm just going to call it projects. Next, I'm just going to put some filler information, so feel free to put your actual information after. I'm going to start off by creating a div for each of our projects, and we looked at this element last time, and basically what this does is allow us to separate different pieces of content on our web page. So next, I'm going to add some project information, so I'm just going to add a project name, and again, I'm just putting filler information. And then under that, we can add a project description, and we looked at all of these different text elements in our previous HTML video. So if we rerun the page, it'll look something like this. Now the reason we put this in a div is the same reason that we added an ID to this text element up here, is so that we can specifically style this text here. So feel free to do that on your own later. We can then just copy this a couple times, and this is what your website might look like in the future. Again, being able to add IDs to specific parts of your website gives you a lot of power when it comes to styling. So to review what we covered, we first looked at advanced HTML tags like headers, footers, and navs. We then looked at how to style specific elements in HTML, and then we looked at how you can structure a personal website. Thank you for watching, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.